This was not merely a war of trenches and artillery. It went far beyond a struggle fought with bayonets and barbed wire. World War I was also a financial war, one fought in gold reserves, bond markets, and central banks, far from the front lines where soldiers shed their blood. Millions paid the price with their bodies, but governments and bankers were calculating balance sheets, and the decisions made in those years did not only determine who won and who lost, they reshaped the global financial system that still defines the world we live in today. In 1914, Europe was already a lit fuse. Rivalries, alliances, and imperial ambitions had turned the continent into a cauldron ready to explode. Yet beneath the language of honor and empire lay a hard truth. A war of this magnitude could not be waged without unimaginable amounts of money. Choosing war also meant choosing debt. Still, most leaders believed the conflict would be short, perhaps over by Christmas. They thought it could be financed with gold, limited borrowing, and patriotic donations. That illusion collapsed within weeks. The war was consuming money far faster than anyone had anticipated. At the time, Europe still lived under the gold standard. Money was tied to physical gold, which strictly limited government spending. But once millions of soldiers were mobilized and industry was fully redirected toward weapons production, costs exploded. Gold reserves proved insufficient. Germany began spending tens of millions of marks per day. Britain was losing millions of pounds every single day. The mathematics were merciless, and eventually the rules were broken. One by one, the great powers suspended the gold standard. This was a quiet admission that money was no longer backed by metal, but by faith in the state. That moment became one of the most critical turning points in modern financial history. Once untethered from gold, money gave governments a new weapon: unlimited credit, the power to print, and persuasion. And those who tasted this power never truly returned. Cut off from global markets by naval blockade, Germany turned to domestic borrowing. The state urged its citizens to buy war bonds. Patriotism, propaganda, and promises of victory filled the streets. In total, more than 100 billion marks were raised, a structure built entirely on the assumption of victory. When defeat came, those bonds turned into worthless paper. Millions lost their life savings, and that anger became fertile ground for the rise of extremism in the years ahead. Britain followed a different path. London was still the financial center of the world, and sterling enjoyed global trust. Before long, attention shifted to the United States. Although officially neutral, American banks, especially J.P. Morgan and Company, became the financial lifeline of the Allied powers. By the time America entered the war in 1917, Wall Street had already been financing it for years. This was not aid, it was a transfer of power. By the war's end, the United States had transformed from a debtor nation into the world's largest creditor. The American century began not on the battlefield, but in accounting ledgers. France followed a similar path, relying on domestic savings and American credit. Russia, however, could not bear the burden. Inflation exploded, trust in the ruble collapsed, and the financial system disintegrated. The revolution of 1917 was not only ideological, it was the result of economic collapse. When the war ended, the picture was devastating. The Allies had spent over $140 billion, while the Central Powers had spent around $60 billion, sums never seen before. The gold standard lay in ruins. Inflation crushed ordinary people, and as always, small savers paid the price. The post-war period was even more dangerous. As America became the center of gold and credit, Europe was crushed under debt. Britain and France, desperate to repay their own obligations, demanded impossible reparations from Germany. This pressure destroyed the German economy and gave birth to hyperinflation. Britain's attempt to return to the gold standard in 1925 proved to be another disaster, producing unemployment, stagnation, and social unrest. Meanwhile, American loans created a fragile financial loop across Europe. That structure collapsed entirely with the Great Depression. World War I proved one thing beyond doubt: money is a weapon. Governments learned they could suspend rules, inflate currencies, and mortgage the future, and legitimize it through patriotism and propaganda. That playbook never disappeared. Every modern financial crisis carries echoes of 1914. So when central banks say inflation is temporary, when debt expands without limit, remember this war. Money detached from reality becomes a tool of control. History does not repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes, and the truth is always hidden in the balance sheets. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History holds the answers. I'll show you where to look.